What if I told you a general under Hitler in World War II was ordered by Hitler to never surrender, never give an inch, and yet he defied him. He defied Hitler. Introducing you folks to Friedrich Paulus, who was the commander of the 6th Panzer Army and led that offensive eastward into deep into the Soviet Union all the way to Stalingrad, which of course is the famous battle which turned the tide of the war. Paulus directed an army of around 200,000 soldiers in the 6th Army. It was part of what is called Army Group Central, which went Stalingrad was Army Group South. Army Group Central, of course, went to Moscow. Army Group North went up to St. Petersburg. And so the Paulus wound up facing such a stiff resistance in the winter months at Stalingrad. Of course, the Russian winter has always been an opponent that no army has ever been able to overcome, including that of Napoleon. But Paulus, nonetheless, was surrounded in a pocket against millions of Red Army soldiers. He asked for permission from Hitler to attempt to break out, and in typical Hitler fashion was denied. Now, Paulus, of course, had a terrible decision to make at this point. And this, of course, being in the winter of 1942, when the German forces reached a high water mark at Stalingrad. And that terrible choice, of course, was to either capitulate and surrender and save the lives of his men, or fight to the death, to the last man, which is close to what happened. But Paulus, on the same day that he was informed that he was being promoted to Field Marshal, this of course had a direct implication from Hitler himself, in that no Field Marshal had ever been captured in combat in German history. He was expected to either commit suicide or fight to the death. That's the message that was sent by this promotion. Worst promotion in the history of mankind entirely. And so he surrendered. He said, you know what, this is not worth it. Very similar to what would happen in Berlin in May of 1945 under Weidling. Of course, by the time Weidling made his surrender of Berlin, Hitler was already gone. In 1942, Hitler, of course, was not even close to gone. So he defied Hitler entirely, surrendered his 250,000 odd army, which of course was outnumbered about 8-1 by this point by the Soviet Red Army at Stalingrad. He surrendered, he gave up. Most important in this particular battle was on the German side also with Hermann Goering. Goering actually had promised Hitler that he could supply Paulus's 6th Army with several 800 tons of supplies daily as provided by his Luftwaffe. But he didn't even achieve 1/8 of this. It was less than 100 tons a day that eventually reached Paulus's freezing, starving, and honestly weakened soldiers. And of course the weaponry and bullets were also almost depleted. So the idea of fighting to the last man was, in Paulus's mind, absolutely impossible. You can't fight without bullets. He saw what any normal person today could honestly see. You can't fight without weaponry. You can't fight without artillery. You cannot fight without tanks. He was losing them left and right. They said it was the cold dark joke in this time was that the 6th Panzer Army was called that because they only had 6 panzers left, which wasn't quite true, but it wasn't that far off. He didn't have a lot of tanks. He had almost no bullets left to fire. So he did what any reasonable person would do, and it's give up and throw in the towel. Of course, in this particular case, Hitler wasn't anything but reasonable. So Paulus surrendered. He was taken into captivity and worked with the Soviet Union to publicly denounce Hitler and his regime. And he promoted basically anti-fascism. They talk these days about Antifa in the United States. Well, guess what, guys? Friedrich Paulus was the original Antifa. He was the ultimate anti-fascist working on behalf of the Soviet Union. He was released from Soviet captivity not only in 1957, upon which he returned to East Germany, which of course was under Soviet control, and lived out the rest of his life in the city of Dresden, which, in another poetic justice of irony, that was a city that was bombed into oblivion by the Allies. It was firebombed into oblivion back in 1943. So Dresden wound up being the city where he lived out the rest of his life. And so Friedrich Paulus basically lived under Soviet influence from the day that he surrendered and for the rest of his life. But given the choice between life and death and this, I'm sure he had I know that he published books that saying he had absolutely no regrets about this decision, which of course in Soviet influenced East Germany went over well. So there it is, the story of the man who was told to fall on a sword, was given the worst promotion in the world's history, told not to surrender, but did, and defied and spat in Hitler's face along the way. So there it is, guys. The man who was ordered and given a promotion to not capitulate, but defied him and did. So that's the story. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus. That is it for today. I will talk to you guys tomorrow, and as usual,